People think empaths are weak because they feel too much, but highly aware empaths are dangerous in a way most people never understand. They can read emotional shifts before words are spoken. They can sense manipulation before the trap is set. And according to neuroscience, their brains may actually process emotional information differently from the average person. What looks like sensitivity on the outside is often advanced pattern recognition happening beneath consciousness. The first trait of a highly aware empath is emotional radar. Most people hear words. A highly aware empath watches microexpressions, breathing changes, voice tension, and eye movement without even realizing it. Research in psychology shows the human brain can detect emotional inconsistencies in milliseconds. Empaths do this constantly. They notice when someone smiles with anger hidden behind the eyes. They notice the pause before a lie. They notice when energy changes the moment a certain name enters the room. This ability becomes powerful in daily life because it protects them from manipulation. While others are convinced by charming personalities, aware empaths sense emotional danger long before evidence appears. That feeling they get in their chest is often their nervous system processing invisible social cues faster than conscious logic can explain, and here's how they can use this ability wisely. Instead of ignoring those instincts to avoid conflict, they learn to pause and investigate them. They stop explaining away discomfort. They begin treating intuition like data. Over time, this creates stronger boundaries, healthier relationships, and a near supernatural ability to avoid toxic environments. The second trait is hyper-awareness of emotional contagion. Science has shown emotions spread through groups like viruses. Studies on mirror neurons suggest humans unconsciously copy the emotions of people around them. But highly aware empaths absorb emotional atmospheres at extreme levels. Walk them into a tense room and their body reacts instantly. Their heart rate changes. Their muscles tighten. Their mood shifts before anyone even speaks. Most empaths suffer because they mistake absorbed emotions for their own. A highly aware empath eventually learns the difference. They realize not every sadness belongs to them. Not every anxiety started inside them. And this changes everything. Because once they separate their emotions from the emotional noise of others, they stop drowning in environments that were poisoning them. They become selective about who they spend time with. They protect their nervous system like athletes protect their bodies. They understand that energy is not mystical fantasy, it is measurable emotional influence shaping hormones, stress levels, and mental clarity. In daily life, this means creating recovery rituals. Silence, solitude, sleep, exercise, time away from emotional chaos. Highly aware empaths understand overstimulation damages them physically, not just emotionally. Chronic exposure to toxic stress increases cortisol, weakens immunity, and accelerates exhaustion. Protecting peace becomes survival, not selfishness. The third trait is pattern recognition. This is where highly aware empaths become almost impossible to deceive. Most people judge isolated moments. Empaths unconsciously track emotional behavior over time. They notice contradictions others ignore. They remember emotional details years later. They detect repeated manipulation cycles long before the average person catches on. Psychologists call this thin slicing the brain's ability to make rapid judgments based on subtle patterns. Highly aware empaths do this naturally. They may not always explain why they distrust someone, but their subconscious has already connected dozens of invisible emotional clues. This becomes incredibly useful in relationships, business, and leadership. Instead of being trapped by surface appearances, aware empaths focus on behavioral consistency. They stop listening to promises and start studying repeated actions. This protects them from narcissists, emotional manipulators, and people who weaponize charm. And here is the terrifying part. Manipulative people often recognize highly aware empaths immediately, because empaths are hard to control. You cannot easily fool someone who notices emotional leakage. That is why emotionally manipulative personalities often attack an empath's confidence first. If they can make the empath doubt their instincts, they regain control. The fourth trait is emotional exhaustion from constant scanning. This is the hidden cost nobody talks about. Highly aware empaths are almost always monitoring emotional environments, even unconsciously. Their nervous system rarely rests. Brain imaging studies suggest Highly sensitive individuals show increased activation in regions connected to empathy and awareness. Their minds are processing more information all the time. This can create burnout that looks invisible from the outside. The empath may seem calm while internally fighting mental overload. Crowded places drain them. Conflict exhausts them. Fake social interactions feel physically painful. But once they understand this trait, they stop judging themselves for needing recovery. They stop trying to live like emotionally numb people. Instead of forcing endless social interaction, they design lives that protect mental energy. And this is where highly aware empaths become powerful. Because when they stop wasting energy on emotional chaos, they become deeply focused, creative, observant, strategic. Some of history's greatest artists, counselors, investigators, and leaders likely possessed this heightened emotional awareness. What once felt like weakness becomes an advantage once managed correctly. The fifth trait is truth sensitivity. Highly aware empaths react strongly to dishonesty because their nervous system detects emotional inconsistency. The body often reveals lies before words do. Tiny delays, forced smiles, vocal strain, artificial enthusiasm. Empaths absorb these details unconsciously. Research in behavioral psychology shows humans leak emotional information constantly through body language and vocal tone. Most people miss it. Highly aware empaths don't. This explains why they feel deeply uncomfortable around fake personalities. Their body experiences emotional mismatch as stress. That is why many empaths suddenly withdraw from people without dramatic explanations. They are responding to emotional signals their conscious mind has not fully translated yet. And in daily life, this trait becomes incredibly valuable when combined with emotional discipline. Instead of reacting impulsively, aware empaths observe silently. They gather evidence. They trust patterns over temporary emotions. This allows them to make smarter decisions in relationships, careers, and friendships. The sixth trait is emotional transformation. Highly aware empaths suffer deeply, but they also evolve deeply. Pain affects them intensely because they process emotional experiences with unusual depth, but this same depth can create extraordinary wisdom. Psychologists often describe post-trauma. I see growth as positive psychological transformation after hardship. Empaths frequently experience this because emotional pain forces them into self-awareness. They analyze human behavior obsessively. They study motives. They learn emotional survival through experience. And eventually, something changes. The empath who once absorbed everyone's emotions begins understanding human nature at a frightening level. They stop chasing approval. They stop over-explaining themselves. They stop trying to rescue people who enjoy chaos. Instead, they become emotionally selective. Calm becomes addictive to them. Peace becomes more valuable than attention. And the moment a highly aware empath chooses emotional discipline over emotional attachment, they become almost impossible to manipulate. Because now their empathy is no longer uncontrolled emotion. It becomes intelligence. It becomes perception. It becomes power. The truth is, highly aware empaths are not weak people overwhelmed by feelings. They are people whose nervous systems are tuned to emotional frequencies most others never consciously detect. Their challenge is not becoming stronger. Their challenge is learning control. Once they learn the very trait that once caused suffering becomes the thing that protects them, guides them, and separates them from the emotional blindness of the world around them. Most people believe deception happens through words, but science says the human body confesses the truth long before the mouth ever speaks. A twitch in the eyelid, a half-second pause before answering, a tightening in the jaw. Tiny signals so small the average person never notices them consciously, but highly aware empaths do. And what makes this terrifying is that many of them don't even realize they're doing it. While most people walk into a room and hear conversations, highly aware empaths walk into a room and feel emotional pressure. They sense tension before conflict begins. They detect hidden anger behind polite smiles. Their nervous system reacts to emotional danger before logic catches up. And according to neuroscience, this may not be imagination at all. Researchers studying emotional intelligence discovered the brain processes facial expressions in less than a fraction of a second. Long before conscious awareness kicks in, the human nervous system is already scanning for emotional threat, but highly aware. We empaths appear to operate at an entirely different sensitivity level. Their brains are constantly collecting invisible emotional data, tone changes, body positioning, breathing patterns, pupil dilation, vocal tension details most people ignore completely. This is why empaths often say something felt off even when they cannot explain why, because the subconscious mind already saw the truth. And here's the disturbing part. Studies in psychology show humans leak emotion continuously. Even trained liars struggle to fully control micro-expressions, those tiny involuntary facial reactions that flash across the face in milliseconds. A fake smile may hide anger. Confidence may hide fear. Calmness may hide resentment. The body betrays emotions before language can cover them up. Highly aware empaths absorb these contradictions automatically. That strange discomfort they feel around someone isn't random anxiety. It's pattern recognition happening faster than conscious thought. Imagine living like that every single day. Imagine noticing emotional fractures in everyone around you. The friend pretending to support you while secretly resenting you. The partner saying, "I'm fine," while radiating emotional shutdown. The coworker smiling while masking hostility. Most people miss these signals entirely. Empaths don't. And over time, this changes them. Because when your nervous system constantly detects emotional inconsistency, trust becomes difficult. Crowds become exhausting. Fake people become unbearable. Many highly aware empaths eventually isolate themselves not because they hate people, but because their brains are overloaded by emotional information every second of the day. Science may explain why. Research on mirror neurons suggests some people are biologically more reactive to the emotions of others. These neurons activate not only when we experience emotions ourselves, but also when we witness emotions in other people. It's one reason humans instinctively feel sadness when someone cries or tension when someone is angry. But in highly sensitive individuals, this emotional mirroring may become amplified. Their brain doesn't just observe emotion, it experiences it. That means a highly aware empath can walk into a toxic environment and feel stress hormones rising in their own body within minutes. Increased cortisol, faster heartbeat, muscle tension, mental fatigue, their number. We system reacts as if the emotional danger belongs to them personally. And if this happens constantly, the damage becomes physical. Chronic emotional stress has been linked to weakened immunity, digestive disorders, sleep disruption, anxiety, depression, memory problems, and even increased inflammation throughout the body. Some empaths spend years believing they are emotionally weak, when in reality their nervous system is overloaded from processing emotional chaos nonstop. The terrifying truth is that many highly aware empaths grew up in emotionally unstable environments. Childhood trauma often trains the brain to scan constantly for danger. A child raised around unpredictable anger learns to detect emotional shifts instantly for survival. Over time, this hypervigilance becomes automatic. They learn to read footsteps, silence, breathing patterns, door movements, tone changes, because their survival once depended on predicting emotional explosions before they happened, and decades later they still do it unconsciously. This is why many highly aware empaths can sense conflict before anyone else notices it. Their brain became trained like a threat detection machine. What others compare to? All intuition may actually be years of unconscious emotional conditioning operating at incredible speed. But here is where things become dangerous. Manipulative people often recognize this sensitivity immediately. Narcissists, emotional predators, and controlling personalities are drawn toward empaths because empaths naturally seek emotional harmony. But highly aware empaths eventually become difficult to manipulate because they notice emotional contradictions too quickly. They notice when words and energy don't match. They notice forced kindness, manufactured charm, artificial empathy, and manipulators hate being emotionally exposed. This is why many empaths experience gaslighting throughout life. People tell them they are too sensitive, overthinking, or imagining things. But weeks later, months later, sometimes years later, the empath discovers they were right all along. The lie surfaces. The betrayal appears. The hidden motive reveals itself. And suddenly that strange feeling makes sense, because their nervous system detected the truth long before evidence arrived. But there is another side to this ability most people never talk about. Highly aware empaths are not only led at detecting pain. They are also extraordinary at detecting potential. They notice sadness hidden behind confidence. They notice exhaustion behind forced laughter. They notice loneliness inside people everyone else ignores. This is why strangers often open up to empaths within minutes. The empath creates emotional safety without trying. People feel seen around them, understood, heard. And psychologically, being deeply understood activates powerful emotional responses in the brain. Human beings crave emotional validation almost as much as survival itself. When someone truly listens, stress levels can drop, emotional defenses weaken, and trust forms rapidly. Empaths do this naturally, but if they are not careful, they become emotional magnets for broken people. And this is where many destroy themselves. Because highly aware empaths often mistake understanding someone for responsibility to save them. So they absorb pain that does not belong to them. They become therapists for emotionally destructive people. They overgive, over-explain, over-sacrifice, until one day their nervous system collapses from emotional exhaustion. And that collapse changes them forever, because eventually, the empath realizes something painful. Not everyone wants healing. Some people only want access to attention, access to emotional energy, access to empathy they never intend to return. And once a highly aware empath learns this lesson, their entire personality changes. They become quieter, more observant, harder to manipulate. They stop ignoring red flags to keep peace. They stop forcing connections with emotionally dishonest people. They stop doubting instincts that have protected them their entire lives. And suddenly their sensitivity becomes power instead of suffering. Because now they understand the difference between empathy and emotional self-destruction. Now they understand that emotional awareness is not weakness. It is advanced human perception. The kind of perception most people are too distracted to develop. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is this. Highly aware empaths often know who someone truly is long before the world sees it. Before the mask falls. Before the betrayal happens. Before the manipulation becomes obvious. They already felt it. Not through magic. Not through fantasy. But through thousands of invisible emotional signals the human body would. As never designed to fully hide. And once an empath learns to trust that perception instead of fearing it, they stop becoming victims of emotionally dangerous people. They become impossible to fool. Most people think empathy is kindness, a soft emotion, a beautiful personality trait. But science tells a darker story. Because when empathy exists without boundaries, it slowly turns the human nervous system into a battlefield. Highly aware empaths do not simply listen to pain. They absorb it. And the human body was never designed to carry the emotional weight of everyone around it. This is why so many empaths feel exhausted without understanding why. They wake up tired after full nights of sleep. Their mind races in silence. Their chest feels heavy in crowded places. They carry anxiety that doesn't even belong to them. And according to neuroscience, this may be happening on a biological level far deeper than most people realize. Studies on emotional contagion show human emotions spread through groups like invisible viruses. One angry person can raise tension across an entire room. One anxious person can unconsciously increase stress in everyone nearby. Researchers found humans mirror the emotional states of others through facial expressions, vocal tone, posture, and subconscious behavioral mimicry. But highly aware empaths experience this at extreme intensity. Their nervous system doesn't just observe emotional energy, it internalizes it. That means the empath sitting beside a chronically negative person may experience real physiological stress responses without speaking a single word. Elevated cortisol, increased heart rate, muscle tension, emotional fatigue. Their body reacts as if the danger belongs to them personally. And when this happens daily, the damage becomes terrifying. Chronic cortisol elevation has been linked to weakened immunity, memory impairment, digestive disorders, insomnia, accelerated aging, anxiety disorders, depression, and even increased risk of cardiovascular disease. In simple words, emotional overload can slowly destroy the body from the inside out. Yet most empaths never realize this. They spend years blaming themselves for being too emotional while their nervous system is drowning in emotional pollution from everyone around them. Imagine carrying invisible emotional weight every time you enter a room. The anger from straight, NERs, the sadness from family, the bitterness from coworkers, the anxiety from relationships. Most people can disconnect from these energies quickly. Highly aware empaths cannot. Their brains remain emotionally open long after everyone else has moved on. This is why emotionally chaotic environments feel physically painful to them. Loud arguments drain them. Fake conversations exhaust them. Crowds overwhelm them. Toxic relationships slowly poison them. And the terrifying part is that many empaths force themselves to tolerate this for years because they believe protecting themselves is selfish. So they keep giving, keep listening, keep rescuing, keep sacrificing their mental peace for people who would never do the same for them. And eventually their body begins to rebel. The burnout starts subtly at first. Mental fatigue, emotional numbness, brain fog, trouble sleeping, loss of motivation. Then something worse happens. The empath who once cared deeply about everyone suddenly wants to disappear from the world completely. Not because they hate people, because their nervous system cannot survive another second of emotional overload. Psychologists sometimes call this compassion fatigue. A state where prolonged emotional exposure physically and mentally exhausts the brain. It is commonly seen in nurses, therapists, caregivers, and trauma workers. But highly aware empaths often live in this condition daily without realizing it. Their emotional openness becomes self-destruction. And here is the tragedy no one warns them about. Manipulative people are naturally attracted to boundaryless empaths, because emotionally generous people become easy emotional resources. Toxic personalities quickly learn the empath will listen endlessly, forgive repeatedly, and prioritize others before themselves. Over time, this creates a dangerous emotional imbalance. The empath becomes the emotional support system while receiving little emotional safety in return. And because empaths feel other people's pain so intensely, they often stay in relationships far longer than healthy people would. They empathize with the trauma of the person hurting them. They excuse bad behavior. They overanalyze abuse. They try to heal people who are actively damaging them. And this slowly destroys their identity. Research in trauma psychology shows chronic emotional stress changes the brain itself. Long-term exposure to toxic relationships can alter stress regulation systems, increase anxiety sensitivity, impair concentration, and keep the nervous system trapped in survival mode. This means some empaths are not overreacting. Their brain has literally adapted to prolonged emotional danger. That's why many highly aware empaths feel hyper alert all the time. Their nervous system is constantly scanning for tension, rejection, mood changes, or emotional instability. Even peaceful moments feel suspicious because their brain became addicted to emotional survival. But then something happens that changes everything. The empath finally becomes exhausted enough to stop sacrificing themselves. And in that moment, they discover the most important lesson of their life. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are survival. This realization transforms them completely. They stop answering every emotional emergency. They stop fixing people who refuse accountability. They stop allowing access to people who drain their nervous system. And at first, others hate this change. Because the empath was once emotionally available to everyone. Now they are selective, protective, distant, and suddenly people accuse them of becoming cold, but the truth is far darker than that. The empath is not becoming cold. They are recovering from emotional starvation. For the first time in their life, they are learning what safety feels like. Science strongly supports the importance of emotional recovery. Studies show solitude, sleep, mindfulness, physical exercise, and reduced exposure to chronic stress dramatically improve nervous system regulation. Time alone lowers cortisol, improves emotional clarity, restores cognitive function, and reduces anxiety levels. This is why highly aware empaths often crave silence after social interaction. Not because they dislike people, because silence allows their nervous system to reset. And once they understand this, their life begins to change in powerful ways. They become extremely careful about who enters their emotional world. They choose peaceful environments over exciting chaos. They stop confusing emotional intensity with love. They realize calmness is not boredom as nervous system safety. And perhaps the most shocking transformation is this. The empath who once absorbed everyone's pain begins protecting their energy like their life depends on it. Because eventually they realize it does. They understand that emotional access is a privilege, not a right. They stop trying to save every broken person they meet. They stop believing empathy requires self-sacrifice. And suddenly their sensitivity becomes strength instead of weakness. Because boundaries do something extraordinary to highly aware empaths. They sharpen intuition. They restore mental clarity. They reduce emotional noise. They allow the empath to finally hear their own thoughts beneath the chaos of everyone else's emotions. And when this happens, the empath becomes incredibly powerful. No longer emotionally reactive. No longer desperate for approval. No longer manipulated by guilt. Now they observe before trusting. They protect peace without apology. They walk away from emotional danger faster. And manipulators can feel this shift immediately. Because the empath who once tolerated emotional abuse now recognizes it within seconds. The same sensitivity that once caused suffering now acts like armor. And perhaps this is the final truth most people never understand about highly aware empaths. Their greatest weakness was never empathy itself. It was the absence of boundaries. Because without protection becomes self-destruction. But empathy with discipline becomes one of the most powerful forms of emotional intelligence a human being can possess. Most people misunderstand transformation. They think it is a moment of motivation, a sudden shift, a dramatic decision. But in highly aware empaths, transformation is not an event. It is a slow neurological rewiring built from emotional overload, psychological pain, and repeated exposure to human behavior at its rawest level. Because when you feel everything too deeply for too long, something inside the brain eventually changes. Not emotionally, biologically. Research in neuroscience shows that repeated emotional stress reshapes neural pathways. The brain begins to prioritize survival over connection. It becomes hyper-attuned to threat, inconsistency, and emotional danger. For highly aware empaths, this means every painful interaction leaves a trace in memory, not just as an experience, but as data. Patterns, warnings, emotional blueprints of human behavior. And over time, this accumulation creates something powerful. Not innocence, but emotional intelligence sharpened by experience. At first, empaths don't read. Lies they are changing. They still overgive, still overtrust, still over-explain their feelings, still try to fix emotionally unavailable people. But each emotional wound adds weight. Each betrayal adds clarity. Each disappointment adds pattern recognition. And slowly, something begins to break. Not their heart, but their illusions. They begin to see that not everyone wants healing. Not everyone responds to kindness with kindness with kindness. Not every emotional connection is safe. And according to psychological studies on attachment and trauma, repeated relational stress can shift the brain from open trust to cautious evaluation. This is where transformation begins, because the empath stops reacting emotionally first and starts observing first. They begin noticing patterns others miss, the cycle of charm followed by withdrawal, the inconsistency between words and actions, the emotional highs followed by silent punishment, the subtle manipulation disguised as affection, the guilt used as control, the empathy exploited as access. And what once felt confusing becomes painfully clear, not because the world changes, but because perception changes. Neuroscience refers to this as predictive process, wiring the brain's ability to constantly update expectations based on past experiences. Highly aware empaths develop extremely refined predictive systems because their emotional input is so intense. They are constantly learning human behavior at an accelerated rate. Every lie becomes a lesson. Every betrayal becomes data. Every emotional contradiction becomes a warning system. And over time, this creates a psychological shift most people never experience. The empath stops assuming goodness by default. They start verifying emotional consistency. And this single shift changes everything. Because now they are no longer emotionally reactive to words. They are responsive to patterns. And patterns do not lie. This is where the empath becomes dangerous not to others, but to manipulation itself. Because manipulative behavior depends on emotional blindness. It depends on the target ignoring inconsistencies. It depends on trust being given too early and withdrawn too late. But the transformed empath no longer operates that way. They begin to feel emotional pressure differently. They sense when someone is performing kindness instead of expressing it. They detect when affection is conditional. I recognize when empathy is being used as leverage. And when that awareness activates, something powerful happens inside them. They detach. Not emotionally cold, but emotionally precise. Psychologists call this emotional differentiation the ability to separate emotion from observation. Instead of becoming consumed by feelings, the person steps into awareness of the feeling. This creates clarity instead of chaos. And for highly aware empaths, this becomes survival, because they no longer confuse emotional intensity with emotional safety. They learn that just because something feels strong does not mean it is healthy. In fact, many toxic relationships are emotionally intense precisely because they are unstable. The nervous system becomes addicted to unpredictability. Dopamine spikes during reconciliation. Cortisol spikes during conflict. This cycle creates biochemical dependency that feels like love but behaves like addiction. But once the empath recognizes this pattern, they begin to withdraw from emotional chaos. And that withdrawal feels like personality change to others. They become quieter, more selective, less available, harder to manipulate. And this is where misunderstanding begins. People who benefited from their emotional openness call them cold. People who use their empathy call them distant. People who relied on their emotional labor call them selfish. But internally, something entirely different is happening. The empath is healing. Because neuroscience shows that emotional overload damages cognitive function over time. Chronic stress impairs decision-making, weakens memory, and reduces emotional regulation. When the empath reduces exposure to emotional chaos, the brain begins to recover. Prefrontal cortex function improves. Emotional regulation strengthens. Cognitive clarity returns. And for the first time in years, they can think without emotional interference. This clarity is where transformation deepens. Because now the empath begins to see not just individual behaviors, but entire systems of behavior. They recognize personality patterns, attachment styles, emotional strategies people use to get needs met. They begin to understand that most manipulation is not random, it is predictable. It follows psychological frameworks. Love bombing, devaluation, intermittent reinforcement, guilt induction, emotional withdrawal. And once you can see the turn, you stop being trapped by it. This is why transformed empaths become extremely difficult to deceive, not because they become distrustful of everyone, but because they become observant of everything. And there is a massive difference between paranoia and perception. Paranoia assumes danger everywhere. Perception recognizes danger patterns accurately. Highly aware empaths evolve toward perception. And with that evolution comes something unexpected. Peace becomes more attractive than intensity. Consistency becomes more valuable than passion. Emotional stability becomes more desirable than emotional excitement. Because their nervous system has learned the cost of chaos. And science supports this shift. Studies on trauma survivors show that after prolonged emotional instability, the brain begins to prioritize predictability over stimulation. Stability starts to feel like safety, and safety starts to feel like love. So the empath begins choosing differently. They no longer chase emotional highs that lead to emotional collapse. They begin valuing people who are calm, consistent, and emotionally honest. And that is when their life changes completely. Because now they are no longer employed. Oceanally available to everyone, they are selectively available to those who are emotionally safe. And this selectivity is what finally protects them. But the most powerful transformation is internal. The empath stops trying to fix people who refuse to change. They stop carrying emotional responsibility for others' healing. They stop sacrificing their own nervous system for people who exploit empathy. And they begin to understand something profound. Empathy is not obligation. Empathy is perception. And perception without boundaries leads to destruction. But perception with boundaries leads to wisdom. This is why transformed empaths are often misunderstood. They do not lose empathy. They refine it. They no longer absorb every emotion blindly. They interpret it. They analyze it. They observe it without drowning in it. And that shift creates something rare in human psychology: emotional clarity without emotional chaos, sensitivity without self-destruction, compassion without exploitation. And once an empath reaches this state, they can never truly return to who they were before, because now they see too much, understand too deeply, and feel too precisely to ever ignore emotional truth. Again, they are no longer surviving emotional life, they are understanding it. And in that understanding, they finally gain control over the very sensitivity that once nearly destroyed them.